Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I have a really special guest with me on the podcast today. Barbara Hunt is joining me all the way from the UK. So we coordinated our time differences to be able to do this. Barbara, welcome. Thank you for being with me today.
Thanks, Navart. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's so great to have you. Okay, so I'm going to tell everyone a little bit about you, and then I'm going to let you properly introduce yourself because you have so many things that you do that are so special, and I won't do it justice. So you kind of on a basic level, I think we'll say you're a transformational coach. You work with people in lots of different ways, and you really guide people through growth and change in life in so many different aspects. And one of the things that you love to work with people on and that you specialize on is forgiveness and being a forgiveness specialist. And you have so many other, like you're a musician, you're a stand-up comedian, like you do so many things. And so I'm going to have you tell us all about you. But one of the ways that you and I connected, I think we connected through one of the Facebook groups as well. And we got to, we met and we talked about specifically forgiveness and the role that forgiveness plays in relationships. And we're going to talk about it in lots of different aspects of the self and the marriage and, childhood and everything. So I will stop blabbering. Tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Navart. Well, I do call myself a forgiveness specialist because it's probably the most interesting part of what I do, because it's such a contentious issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just fascinated and have been since my teens, everything personal, spiritual development. And I'm just fascinated by the tools that we can learn. And, and over the years, I've collected up lots of different tools and approaches to different things. And then I got kind of hooked on forgiveness probably about 10 years ago and just thought this is such a fascinating subject. And then I stayed with it. And then I wrote my book, Forgiveness Made Easy. And then I started leading classes and I do coach people one-to-one so that they can actually work through things that are troubling them and things that they want to release. But some of the trouble with forgiveness is, I nearly called my book that, The Trouble with Forgiveness.
Love it.
Yeah. We don't understand it. Like we think maybe it doesn't really apply to us. And there are lots of stories of heroic forgiveness where people have forgiven like really grievous, harms. And so sometimes I think we think that forgiveness is in the realm of the extraordinary, as opposed to the daily need for us to practice forgiveness. And because also it's been in the remit of the religious field, or belongs to most of the spiritual traditions, I think that's our understanding of it. But because more and more, fewer and fewer of us have actually any necessarily like a specific religion that we adhere to, I think of it now as a secular ethics practice, something that we need for our mental and emotional well-being. But also because I do have a spiritual life, if you have a spiritual life, it's a master spiritual practice because it's one of the hardest things that we do. And I think of it and teach it like meditation, mindfulness, meditation, and forgiveness, if it began with an M.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah, I love that because you're right. When you think of forgiveness, defining that is so difficult. I mean, I couldn't even right now, if I was to think like, okay, how would I explain forgiveness to a child? Because that's usually, if we want to break something down, how would we say it to a kid? It's a very difficult concept. And even whether you're looking at it from a spiritual or religious perspective, or just a secular perspective and just a kind of more humanistic perspective, like is really, really hard because I think people don't really know, is forgiveness for the other person? Is forgiveness for me? Who am I doing this for? What does it look like? How do I do it? So maybe let's start there. How would you define forgiveness?
Well, I'm really glad you asked because I do use a very, very particular definition that I learned in my book. And it came from one of my original teachers in forgiveness, a guy called K. Bradford Brown, who created something called the More to Life program. So that was a very early personal spiritual development workshop and then program that I was involved in about 30 years ago. And I trained with them to be a mentor and teach some of their programs. And he says that forgiveness is the absolute refusal to hold ill will against someone for what they did or didn't do. So I'll say it again because it's quite long.
Yes, please.
The absolute refusal to hold ill will against someone for what they did or didn't do. And I love it for lots of reasons. So so this is my sort of like my demo. So we gather up our grievances, you know, things kind of happen, and we gather the things that people do that we don't like, and we sort of gathering up a whole armful of items, and we don't put it down.
Yeah.
We just collect. And it's a bit like, you'd say garbage, the rubbish that we would collect in the house. You don't just leave it festering in the bins. Every now and then you take it outside, and then if you're lucky enough to live somewhere where they have refuse collection, it gets taken away. But we don't do that with our emotional lives. We just hold on to it. And so the absolute refusal looks like this: putting everything down.
Yeah.
And that gives you, and it gives you a real sense of the not doing side of forgiveness. And this is one of the big problems, is because it's something that we're not doing, it's really hard to describe it and imagine it. It's a bit like giving up an addiction. It's something that you stop doing. So it's the absolute refusal. And I love that, because I'm in charge, because it doesn't matter how much you tell me or ask me, unless I'm the one actually choosing to put it down, nothing happens. But I absolutely am 100% in charge of the fact that I can choose to do it. And it doesn't mean that it's easy, which is, you know, what I'm for, is to help make it easier. But the absolute refusal, and its ill will, is like a scale. So from like a tiny mini little grudge, or a, you know, they did the thing, or, you know, they shouldn't be like that. Anytime we want something or someone to be different from the way it is basically a little grievance, just a little, you know, just something small, to the bigger and bigger things that we also collect. So right through grudges, hatred, anger, you know, wanting revenge, or, you know, like it's a whole scale, but it's ill will, basically. It's like wishing that either the other person was different, or that they hadn't done what they did to any degree. So that's the ill will. And for what they did or didn't do, which I also think is really important, especially when we think about forgiveness of maybe our parents or our loved ones. Sometimes it's the not putting the shoes away part that is the little grievance that we gather, the things that somebody, or they forget a birthday, or they don't treat you with expressed delight, you know, whatever it is, it's what we don't get. So the absolute refusal is just you choosing to let it go. And that is one of the hardest things that we ever try and do, because we have this sort of sense of equality. You know, when something bad happens, we even say we want to get even. We want some kind of retribution. We want some kind of sense of justice. And there's something called, one of the most sort of prolific researchers in forgiveness, Everett Worthington, he talks about the injustice gap between what happened and the way that you would think things should be. And we try and meet that gap. And usually what it's for is our resentment.
Oh, wow, girl. Yes. I mean, so much there. I love your demo. So for people that aren't watching this and are just listening to it, you picked up a bunch of items from your desk, held them close to your heart, and that is the representation of just holding on to stuff. And the absolute refusal is releasing that. And so I love it. It's relatable. Like, it's something that you can really see and apply it. And also, a couple of things that I kind of stuck out to me is the way that you describe it is very much, like you said, you have control. So in essence, we, as the people that need to give forgiveness or are holding on to these things, it's about us. It's about what we feel. It's about what we perceive. It's not about the other person. So just by looking at it that way, we can really see that by choosing to work towards forgiveness, it's about healing ourselves. It's about releasing ourselves. It's not about the other person. When you say the absolute refusal, I'm the one doing the refusing. I'm the one making the choice to let that go. And I think a lot of the times people get hung up on, well, that person doesn't deserve my forgiveness. So then the kind of the tables, I don't know if the tables get turned is the right term, but basically the perception of the issue is is false, because the perception is that that person has to be worthy of something, but it has nothing to do with that person. It's about the burdens we're carrying, the hurts, and the way that it's impacting us. And so I love kind of, I love your whole description of it, because it's very much about how do we take back control and not let this feeling dominate our lives. So very hard indeed. My goodness. I imagine, have it now down to, even though you've been doing it for a really long time, you have to really help someone dig into why they're holding, like, why did they pick up all this stuff? What was the reason for that? So how do you help people understand why they're holding on to these hurts?
Yeah, great. I'm really enjoying your input. It's because I think a lot of the time we don't even relate to it as something that's even important. It's not on our map a lot of the time, um, because we think of ourselves as nice people, so we don't own up to our resentments. That's one of the kind of like big things in the way. If you think about on your dating profile, you would never put bears grudges for years, never lets anyone forget anything. We know that that's not a quality, and
Yeah.
so we don't often allow ourselves to see that part of our shadow. And the interesting thing about forgiveness is it's deep shadow work, because we have to admit how petty, how unrealistic, how, like how, kind of cruel and judgmental and ridiculous we can be about the behavior of other people. But I really love what you said. The emphasis that you're putting is on the control, and as in the power that's yours. I have the power whether or not I'm going to carry my resentments, and that does make you a very powerful person. If you think about somebody like the Dalai Lama, or another kind of great spiritual teacher, like maybe Nelson Mandela, I mean, what an exemplar of forgiveness, and how powerful you can get a real sense. Martin Luther King, all of these people who have such power because they are choosing to not retaliate. Something terrible happens, there's a big injustice gap, but they choose with their, like, just because they're conscious beings, they choose to leave the gap. Yes, this happened, this incredible injustice happened, and I am going to choose with my power to not retaliate, or not to expect any kind of compensation or recompense. I mean, sometimes we feel like we need that. We think, well, if the other person apologizes, if they try and do some kind of reparation, then maybe I'll think about it. But that's, again, you're giving your power away to the other person.
Mhm.
And the thing that happened, the injustice, it happened. You
Yeah.
can't change that it happened. It may be that there's something that needs to happen, that you may need to seek justice. You may even seek restorative justice, where you have the opportunity to actually meet the person who was the perpetrator, and you as the victim have the opportunity to go through that process. That's sometimes available for people. But in our sort of everyday lives, we just gather the resentments, and then we wonder why our jaws are hurting, or our shoulders are stiff, or why we just don't feel as in love with our partner anymore, or why we just avoid that person in the office, or don't want to go and visit our parents. And it's the subtle things. And I think there's a lot of feelings that we don't want to feel. I say that forgiveness and grief are like sisters, because when you go through the process of forgiving, you're acknowledging that there may be things that need to be grieved. You're acknowledging what you didn't get. You're acknowledging a hurt or a harm. And we don't want to go there. We don't want to feel our so-called negative feelings, or our painful feelings. And then also, we don't want to admit, like I was saying about the resentment, but also there may be shame. And this is part of my relationship with forgiveness. I don't have a big, as in an acute story about forgiveness. Mine is a chronic one,
Mm.
because my mum had multiple sclerosis. So from the time I was 15, I was living with a woman who was becoming increasingly more and more disabled, and less my mum. And that went on for 15 years. So that's kind of chronic resentment, because I didn't know how to grieve it. I didn't know how to meet it other than by shutting down my heart. And I think it's a really important part of one of the reasons why we don't forgive is because we don't want to feel our vulnerability. We think it's the weaker position. We think it's going to, harm us in some way. And the truth is, we've already been harmed. And the holding on to the resentment feels like power or some kind of protection. So there's more I can talk about, but just love to hear
Yeah.
back. There's
Yeah.
lots of reasons why we hold on.
Yeah, I love that. The way that you kind of talk about the gap too, because where my mind went is it's like, okay, kind of back to your example of the trash, the garbage, the rubbish. Rubbish is such a more fun word. The rubbish. It takes, like, my mind went to a visual of like it now is taking space. Right now, this rubbish has created a little comfortable spot for itself within me, and it's taken hold of that. Like, now that is its spot. And so if I want to consider giving that up, releasing that, and not hanging on to this, well, now I have this gaping hole that I don't know what to fill with, because I've gotten attached to my resentment. I've gotten attached to my hurt. And it's become a part of me that I've allowed. I've pulled out a chair and welcomed it into my life and let it take hold. So now, if I want to do the work, if I can get to that point of, really self-awareness, to recognize that this is, I've hurt myself by allowing this to reside within me, and I want to do the work to release it. Now I have to figure out what to replace that with. So, what do you find? How do you help people find a healthier, I don't even know what we call it. Like, what is healthier to hold, I guess?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, like I said, it's so hard to talk about it because we can't imagine it, which is why the kind of gathering things helps to sort of just get a bit of a picture. And if you look up on the internet, if you search for images of forgiveness, you kind of get hands or like stones with forgiveness written on them. There is, like, again, there isn't really a very good like option. And but what people normally feel after they've been through, because I have a 7-step forgiveness made easy process that I take my clients through, and it's in my book as well.
Yay,
But
good.
it's the way people normally respond at the end is they say they feel lighter. And I used to work on a retreat. It was a detox retreat, so people were primarily coming to lose weight, but we were also working with them to lose their emotional weight. And
Mm,
that was the biggest shift, was the fact that they felt different about themselves and about their lives going forward, because they'd managed to shed some of the emotional weight. So in some ways, you don't really want to replace it with anything.
right.
You
Yes.
want to just leave the scales. It's like you're going to take the resentment off, and so then you're left with the scales imbalanced, but then you're lighter. And there's a really lovely Egyptian myth, which is at the end of your life, your heart is put on one side of the scales, and then there's an ostrich feather that's put on the other. And if your heart is as light as a feather, you go on into the
Oh
afterlife.
my gosh, that's beautiful. I love
I
it.
just
Love
because
it.
also sort of thing where we think, well, we'll forgive that person later, like maybe we'll see if they'll apologize, or whether or not there's some kind of justice, or and like you said right at the beginning, the pain that we're carrying and the burden and the poison in our veins, you've probably heard that, like holding on to resentment is like taking poison and hoping the other person will die. Or my particular favorite, holding on to resentment is like setting yourself on fire and hoping the other person will be bothered by the smoke.
Wow. I've never heard that. I love that. Yeah.
Isn't it great? It just
It's
gives you a
great.
sense of like, they're not even in the room in the oven with you in the furnace. They're kind of, you're hoping wind will be blowing in the right direction, and they'll be like
Yeah.
feeling really bad about themselves. And,
Nope.
that, and again, all we can do is choose what we have in our own hearts.
Yeah.
And one of my big missions is to make forgiveness seem more attractive, like to say it's a mental and emotional well-being practice. It changes your physiology, it lowers your cortisol levels, it increases your sort of, overall well-being, because it improves your blood pressure and, lowers your heart rate. And, there's so many like benefits that have been proven by science to actually physiologically help when you don't resent. And just even, like the tension that you have in your jaw when you're,
Yeah.
you have to remember to kind of hold on to that tension, just the release that you feel physiologically as well as emotionally and then spiritually, and if we want to move towards a world that does not have war all the time, then we can pledge our own hearts. we can say, I'm going to make my heart a garden of peace. That's my responsibility. I can choose. And then on your deathbed, you really will have a heart as light as a feather, because you will have done your forgiveness work through your life. You were just gone, oh, here I am. I'm just resenting that person again.
Oh,
Put it on your list, do your practice, a bit like a yoga practice. You don't say, I've done yoga. It's a practice. You're going to keep practicing.
lifestyle. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I stand corrected. I love that. So it's not about replacing, you're absolutely right. Like, it's not about replacing, my dog is dreaming, and I don't know if you can hear her. It's not about replacing the rubbish with something better. It's like, what a good point. It's about being free, like being lighter. It creates this available space for more positive life, right? So you can just now move forward, live your life without this burden, and you just move through life more beautifully and in a more kind of spirit free. I don't know, it's just, there is freedom. I think it's a release of that, where you get some of your life back.
Yeah, and it might fill with other more beautiful
Yes.
emotions. That is also what happens. So as I take people through the process, and we get to a particular point where they're taking the position of the other person, so they're able to see and have a bit more compassion about the other person, that can sometimes really shift things. And then when you, towards the end of the process, you then say, is there some kind of new intention that you have towards this person about how you want to treat them or how you want to think of them? Sometimes there's an outpouring of compassion or appreciation or something, but I don't ever insist on that. And some of the teaching around forgiveness, it kind of implies or encourages you to have so-called positive emotions towards that person, or to want to do good things for that person. And I would say that's more advanced.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in, getting people just to help to let go of what's
Yeah.
there and shift their position enough that they are just not holding their resentment, kind of like part one. Then doing good to those that abuse you, that's kind of a bit more advanced.
Yeah. And I don't know that it's always necessary, because I think the release of them from your life, like being able to just make a decision that they do not hold place in your life and they don't ever have to, and that you have the freedom and the power to live a life free of this person, I think can be so empowering for people. Um, so, it's funny, as we're talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have like 2 hours worth of questions that I want to get through. So we're gonna have to, we'll figure out what we can fit in, and we may just have to do another one. But I want to take it. You and I had previously talked about the different ways that we as human beings deal with the need for forgiveness. And we talked about the impact of childhood struggles, where we have maybe some hurts and resentments towards parents or people who primarily, played a role in raising us. And then we have, forgiveness work to do within ourselves, because we live and we make mistakes, and some people can move forward from that more easily than others, and it really depends on the situation. And then we've talked about forgiveness within a relationship, whether it's just a kind of a friendship or siblings or something, and then there's, within your intimate relationship with your spouse, your significant other, and there's so much there. And I think, before we dive into those, one of the things I was thinking about, and I'm curious about your perspective on this, is that as humans, we're just, I think there's a natural inclination to experience anger and hurt. Like, we're just, I don't know, that feeling of injustice is something that we all feel on some level. Some people hold on to that more than others, but like, we're all flawed, we all make mistakes, and we all like being mad. At some point, it just feels good to be angry, even if you do think of yourself as, I'm such a nice person. But at the end of the day, there is power in anger, whether you hold on to it for a minute or a year. It's something that's so like, I don't want to let it go. I just want to be mad, so. I'm mixing up way too many things probably, but I didn't want to forget that thought. But like, what do you think about even that thought?
Yeah. Well, it's a great conversation to have, because anger is really important. Anger is when we realize there's been a boundary transgression, and it's usually when we've said yes too many times first, when we should have not said yes, when we know we've let an unmet need continue to be unmet, and then eventually we go, that is it, enough. So sometimes that anger can be good, and anger usually is in the moment. It's the sort of like, get out, I'm leaving, you know, like it helps you to come away from danger. You know, it's like, we need, like you said, we need to be able to feel these things. Resentment is sort of cooler anger, that you're kind of chewing over it, like the next week you're still like, you know, and so that, so it's that you then eventually your arms get tired of carrying all of that stuff. And if nothing changes, because sometimes people argue for, well, you need anger because that you need righteousness, and you need to say this is not acceptable, and then that helps you to pursue justice, which, you know, it can be motivating, but you don't take your kids to school every morning because you're angry. There are other things that motivate you as well. So it's like, so yeah, it has its uses. It's important that we recognize it, because it's usually like an alert to us, oh, like, there I've gone, you know, I've gone past what's okay with me, and it helps us to know that that's not okay. And sometimes in the moment it can get us out of danger. But apart from that, like, what happens in our brains as well is, if we're really angry, the things that we need to access, like our compassion, is like they're kind of offline. You know, it's a bit like when you're in danger, you're not thinking things through with your prefrontal cortex, you're just getting out of the road, you know, like you're moving out of the way. So there is a sort of a kind of timing, if you like, to it. And sometimes people wait like 20 or 30 years or longer to do their forgiveness work on somebody. Other people can do it when it's a bit more malleable, but that it really is, that's a very personal decision. And of course, you don't have to forgive. I mean, you're very welcome to just lie on your deathbed with your jaw as, you know, rigid as a concrete block, and not have forgiven anyone. Of course, that's, you have that's your choice. But it's more really, if you want to feel more free of the impact of other people and life, you want to take the power that you have, and the power is in what you choose to think about that person, how you choose to feel about them. And again, it isn't easy, but it's possible. But it's just like, we also need to know how. And one of the things that happens a lot is that there's talking about how important forgiveness is, that we need to do it. You know, like, one of the models that's used in academia is a 20-step 4-phase model. That could be off-putting to some people, who think, I don't have time, I just hate my husband. You know, like, you know, like, you want to shift things quickly. So that was, again, one of the things that, you know, my book is called Forgiveness Made Easy, and it should have really been called Forgiveness Made Easier, because I don't think it ever is easy, but you know, easier works. But it helps you to maybe shorten that 20-year delay between the thing that happened and you actually going, oh, maybe I need to forgive this. And then it happening. And I have a friend at the moment who's going through a very tricky divorce, and I don't bring up, she knows what I do for a living, I'm not bringing it up with her, you know, because she's not ready. She's still in the fury phase of that, and she's and like, I think she's being served. But what's interesting is, when you look at what you get out of your resentment, you know, the benefits of it, or the apparent benefits of it, that can be another very revealing thing. But the first part is acknowledging that you're holding the resentment in the first place. And sometimes I hold things online called forgiveness fields, where I invite everyone to come together. So we do them on Zoom, and it's like a practice place, a bit like you come and do a yoga class, you come and do a forgiveness class, and I take you through the process, so you have an opportunity to forgive. Not a really big deal, you know, I don't ever do them on like your mom or your dad, but just like, you know, an annoying colleague, or, you know, something that's happened recently with a neighbor, you can do that kind of forgiveness work in that kind of context. But I get everyone to start writing down their forgiveness list. And this was what I was invited to do this on that first training with Kay Bradford Brown. And I got to number 36 because I lowered my bar. I thought, well, probably pretty much everyone I've ever met, you know, early childhood friends, you know, blah, blah, blah. So I was writing my list, and I got to number 36 and thought, yeah, probably resent my mum as well. Put her name down. So it was a real kind of admission of like, actually, I have held a lot of grievances, things that, not big things, but just like the kid at school who wrote a really mean thing in my autograph book, or, you know, like, it's just like the little grievances experiences.
Yeah.
And so when you start writing them down, and then you write down how many years you've held on to them, and then you total up those years, even in a very relatively small group of people, you have about 1,000, over 1,000 years of resentment. And so then you're thinking, well,
Powerful.
no wonder the world is the way it is.
Yeah.
Maybe it would be a good thing for us to engage with,
Yeah.
and free our own hearts.
Oh my gosh. Yes. That is such a great exercise because I don't think we realize that we are carrying all these things. And okay, I have to take you back. I giggled a little bit when you said you're welcome to carry all these resentments until your deathbed, because I, I think we have to acknowledge that that's also a choice. You are allowed to choose to carry these burdens with you. You are allowed, like if you want to choose to be miserable and you want to choose to just be mad at the world, that is your choice. No one you're not forced to do forgiveness work. You're not forced to let go of these resentments. However, if you're going to choose to hang on to these things, you have to acknowledge that choice and you have to live with that choice, because it is like, to me, resentment is like when something like anger comes and goes. We all deal with anger, but resentment is when it like grows, the anger grows fangs and it just digs in, right? So now you have this tick that has lodged itself into your skin, and it doesn't hurt. You don't feel it there, but it is doing something to you. It's affecting you. And over time, it does change you, right? And so as long as we can face, so if someone's listening to this and is like absolutely not ready to forgive, that's fine. You do not have to. We have no judgment for that. I'm sure we all hold on to things, but we all owe it to ourselves to say, but why am I still holding on to it? First of all, what am I holding on to? Why am I holding on to it? And why do I not want to let it go? What is that? Like, what is that power that I'm holding by not letting it go? And what will my life look like if I let it go? What will I lose? What will I gain? And so now maybe this will segue us into the burdens we carry because of our resentment. So if we're talking about childhood stuff, carrying a resentment either that we're very mindful of and we know we have anger towards someone from our childhood, or we don't realize it till we're in a conversation like this, right? So how do you see the impact of old long-term chronic resentment play out in someone's today, and how does it affect them today?
I think there's definitely a physiological component. So it may be, and I always think, I don't know this for sure, but it's worth trying. If you are suffering from some kind of autoimmune disease like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, or like any kind of like chronic pain that you're in, definitely worthwhile experimenting with doing some forgiveness work, because to me it makes sense that there's a kind of a stiffness in you if you're holding a resentment. It's a stuck position.
Ah,
So that's a potential. I don't know for sure. I mean, there are studies that are done, even on the relationship between the progression of cancer. I think the most recent one was a study done on melanoma and how fast it progressed, and whether or not doing forgiveness work would slow down the progression.
interesting. Wow.
Yeah. So worth investigating. So I think there's a physiological aspect. I think there's also an emotional aspect, as in, although you might say it's just your resentment and it's just towards that person, that there's a kind of hardening of the heart that happens, and a like, the paper guide on your printer. You can't shut just one side down. You shut down to all of the relationships you have. So your resentment might rob you of your intimacy or the way you trust people. And also, there's what's hard sometimes to distinguish is the difference between the resentment and the trauma, the thing that happened. Because we often blame the thing that happened, even though it may have happened 30 years ago. But actually, it may be that it's the resentment about the thing
Yeah.
that we're stuck on, not the trauma, because it's over. And obviously there's things that you need to do to heal from trauma release, somatic experiencing. I mean, there's amazing body work, again, that's amazing to do. And forgiveness is kind of like a piece it's like in the healing process. And like I said, it sometimes involves grieving, because we have to acknowledge what we lost or what was taken from us. And again, in the process that I take people through, there's an opportunity for restoration, as in things that have been taken to be restored. So there is a way of, like, in your imagination, it's true, but it works very powerfully. But there's a way of restoring that. So I think there's an emotional part. There's definitely a mental part, because if you're going to bed, you're thinking, I can't go to sleep because of that.
Mhm.
And it's on your mind. And so it's bothering you in your thinking. And how do I get revenge? Or how do I get justice? Or why did it happen? Or why did they pick me? Or why don't they see? Like, we're chewing over it mentally. So I really think that there's an important, this is a mental and emotional well-being practice, as well as having impacts on our physiology. And then also maybe spiritually, because if you have a faith or some kind of spiritual kind of desire to evolve as a human being, and to understand and experience your true nature, holding resentment, I can't think of a reason why that would be a helpful apart from to make you humble about your own shadows. But but it's not, it's going to get in the way again of you really being a free human being, to be loving and compassionate with your heart open. So it might even cost you in your own integrity, or your autonomy, or
Mhm.
your humanity.
Yeah. And that is so it's so important for I think just the awareness of where did it start? When did it start? Because I think one thing that we have to remember is that when our hurts start at a very young age, then that becomes it gets ingrained in our development, right? So it's formative. It's, if I experience this trauma as a child, or this anger, the situation, then and I've carried it with me and I didn't realize how it was affecting me. As a kid, we're not we're not really self-aware, right? And or we're very like teens, we talk about teens being very selfish, self-centered, and it's not from a negative, it's just developmentally they cannot see easily outside of themselves. Everything that happens feels very personal. And so when you have these very hurtful experiences where someone harms you or does wrong to you as when you're young, then that becomes a part of you. It becomes a part of how you see the world. It becomes a part of how you see yourself. You carry that chip on your shoulder. You carry that baggage with you. And so, like you were saying, you get to this place as an adult, if you're reflecting and trying to release some of these things, you have to. It's not just about letting go of what you've held against that person. It's redefining how you see yourself. And that is terrifying, because if I've thought of myself this way for 20, 30 years, and now all of a sudden I have to redefine who I am, and I have to see myself outside of that lens. Like, I've cleaned the lens and it really looks different, and I don't understand what I'm seeing. That's terrifying, right? And so there's also a fear. It's kind of like I kind of relate it to like that really gross security blanket you had as a baby, and it's gross because you will not wash it and you will not let it go and you drag it through the mud, but it means so much to you. But then you get to the point where you realize, like, it makes you sick now. It's so dirty. Like, it really is causing more harm than good. But you have to release of this thing that once brought you so much comfort that now actually is causing harm. There's a lot of fear, of vulnerability, so then letting go of that maybe resentment towards a parent or a childhood harm that happened leaves you free, but it leaves you scared.
It's such a good point. It's such a good point, because it is about who we think we are, because we make early decisions. Something happens, and it not consciously, we're not thinking, oh, I'm never going to trust anyone again. But things like that happen in our childhoods if we experience
Yeah.
certain things. And so then that becomes, who we think we are. And, we often have these sort of like life in our different parts of our lives. We might go, I don't even know who I am anymore, because we're having to redefine that as we keep evolving. And with the right help, you can go move through that in a graceful way rather than a traumatic way. But that's why I say it's deep shadow work. And just as you've described it, it's almost like no wonder we don't forgive very much, because not only are we having to face our own shadows, it's almost like we're having to deconstruct who we are and then reconstruct who we are in our relationships, it as in ourselves, but also in how we relate to other human beings. So it is, it is like, I always feel like, even when I have an open forgiveness field, and like maybe like 10 people come, I'm like, oh my God, 10 whole people, that's amazing, because it's so hard,
Yeah.
but one of my missions is to be talking about it, to make it look like it's accessible, and like the next big thing, like mindfulness. We need to know how to forgive, and especially if we're going to create a world that works for everybody, it's an
Yeah.
essential practice. And there's a really lovely quote by the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and he says, without forgiveness there really is no future. And
Mhm.
I believe that we urgently need to learn how to do it and practice it.
Mhm. And carrying that into relationships current. So anyone thinking of where they are now in their marriage or their partnership, I think that is so important to reflect on, because we may have very obvious hurts with the person we're in a relationship with, or we may have some really subtle ones that we're not fully aware of. And so I think that, one of the things that I want to teach more people about, one of the things I always tell, no matter what capacity, is self awareness, self awareness, self awareness. Like I beat it down because it's so important. Like, whatever you're going through, you know you're not okay, but you don't know why you're not okay. You may know one part of why. Maybe you hate your job. Okay, great. That's fine. Now we've recognized that. But very rarely does your problem come from just one aspect. Like, if you hate your job, but it is now impacting your mood, your health, your relationships, then there's more to the problem than just you hate your job. There is something about you that has shifted. There is either a perception of self, or perception of others, or perception of the world. Like, there are other things. And so now when we're talking about forgiveness work, there's, how do I forgive someone that has hurt me in the past? Like, let's say you're in a relationship, this person hurt you in the past, but you're still in a relationship with them. Okay, that's tough. Have you done the work? Or did you sweep it under the rug because it was just safer to not rock the boat, to not erupt this whole thing? Or did you really do the forgiveness work and you're good? You've made peace with it. You're still in a relationship with this person, but hurt still can come up. Like, you can have done forgiveness work. And I think, I'm curious about your perception here. You can have done the work. You could have really gotten to a place of release, but still have moments of just zingers, like little hurts that maybe still come up from that past situation. And so what that to me tells me is that let's just do some maintenance work. That doesn't mean we have to start from the beginning and really do. It's like, hey, something has come up for you. Maybe it's a phase of life. Maybe it's just some reminder. Let's just hop back in and do some work. And I think a lot of people are scared. I don't want to bring it back up with my husband or my wife now, because we've gotten past it. I've forgiven him or her, and now I'm feeling something. But if I bring it back up, they're going to think I'm not over it. And so I don't know. I don't know what my question there is, but that's just where my mind went.
Yeah, I love it. There's a couple of things actually. One is the repeat, rinse and repeat. Like one of the original, big advocates of forgiveness was Jesus, who said, when he was asked, how many times should I forgive? 70 times 7. So that's every time. And this idea of rinsing and repeating is like you said, you're not necessarily going to do the huge big piece again, but there's like, it's a bit like, you do a really good spring clean, and then you vacuum every now and then,
Yeah.
and then you do another really good spring clean. It's just like that. Or, a yoga practice, you might go for an intensive weekend or a holiday or something, and then you just do your daily practice. And the way I teach the forgiveness process, is that you do it in your imagination. So you're not doing it with the other person. So that means that a lot of the kind of like the little kind of grudgy things that you've built up, you can then maybe, hun, can we have a conversation about that one thing? We need to talk about this issue because it keeps coming up for me. But you're not trying to get them to listen to all of the stuff,
Yeah,
which is usually,
definitely.
most of us, to be fair, don't like being told all the places where we're wrong or how much somebody resents us. And usually also our resentments are about us. You know, one of the things I used to talk about with my mom was I used to resent her for wearing pop socks, which is like nothing to do with her. She doesn't need to know about my judgmental fashion preferences. You know, it's just that's mine. And so doing a process in the privacy of your own space or with a therapist means that you can clear a lot, so that you're very clear on what is it, what's the actually, what's the unmet need that I need to have a conversation with my spouse about. And maybe you do need to go over the thing again, because you know, maybe that's true, but you'll know, because there's a way of working through that material yourself. And some of it is in you know, in a forgiveness way, but some of it might be cognitive. You might be able to look at the meaning. That's another way that I work with my clients with the transformational coaching, is to look at the meaning, you know, because we're adding things, you know, like if my husband has an affair, I'm making it mean something about me. I'm inadequate, on off me, I don't matter anymore, I, you know, blah blah blah. I mean, we make it stuff about us, as opposed to, well, we don't know what those choices were, and you know, and being able to restore some kind of sense of sanity around the meaning making, which is one part, and then also what you're holding on to, which is another.
Yeah. You know, okay, let's talk a little bit about, because this is something, okay, if I kind of shift over to the counseling part of my life, I I've had lots of people over the years that I've worked with who have had a spouse, you know, cheat on them or do something really, really hurtful that broke the trust. So, and my perspective always, it's like, let's not, before we even get to forgiveness, let's talk about the ability to live with this thing, right? And we'll get to the, you know, the forgiveness piece is very, very difficult, but we'll get there. But first you have to remember that even that when you do all the work and you complete all the, even if you get to a point of forgiveness, you always will have to make that choice within yourself. No one else can help you with this choice, but you have to decide is, can you still live with this person? Even if you release yourself of the anger and the hurt towards them, can you live with this person and resume or maintain a relationship given what has happened? And you know, and this might be an unpopular belief, but I don't think everyone can live with that. I think sometimes the right answer is, sorry, I can't. I just know myself. And I know that I will never be able to be a good partner to you in the future because I will always see you through this lens of what happened. And so tell me what you think about, how do you help? I don't know, like, how do you help someone find forgiveness with someone that they are currently living with? So they can't detach and do forgiveness work fully on their own. They have to still be in a relationship with this person. And then what happens if that forgiveness leads to, but I have to release you from my life?
Well, it's interesting, because I think that can be one of the reasons why we hold on to our resentment. Because if we hold our resentment, we don't have to go through the forgiveness process and then decide whether or not to stay in the marriage. You know, that is one of the, you know, one of the benefits is it absolves us somehow. If I'm holding the resentment and I can't let it go, it absolves me of making a difficult decision or of taking the power, and it means I can blame the other person. And then also I can blame my behavior. Well, I can be slightly arsy or a little bit, you know, maybe I can justify my affair if he's had one, you know. So there's a lot of underground stuff that's going on that you have to be really honest about. And sometimes, exactly as you say, the right decision is to leave. You know, you can do all your forgiveness work and just say, actually, I'm still going to choose to leave.
Uh-oh, you got a little frozen there. Ah, hold on, guys. Technical
Because I
issues.
don't want to stay
Oh,
with you, to make that really clear decision.
we lost you there. Can you
Yeah, yeah.
see me?
Did you?
Hear me? There you are.
I can.
Okay, you
Yeah, I
are.
can see
So
it.
you were saying that sometimes even after all the work, the decision is say I still have to leave. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that is, I think, okay, so tell me a little bit about, like, in your experience, someone is choosing, like, I want to do my best. I want to be in this relationship. I want to do my work. In my mind, it's a little harder to do healing work and forgiveness work when you're dealing with you when you're in a day-to-day relationship with that person, but it's still doable. Like, I think you just learn the boundaries of, and it's part of communication and all the things where you say, okay, I need time. And this is where I think, to do good work, you have to figure out what you need. You can't say, well, we'll work on it together and we'll see. Like, yes, you'll do some work together, but you have to say, I need space, time in this fashion. I need you to give me this kind of distance or these kinds of boundaries, or I need to have this kind of information from you to help me really work through this. And I think people are afraid, people that don't want to rock the boat are afraid to ask for what they need. And I think that, my goal, message, whatever you want to call it, is, if you want to do the work right, you have to be honest about what you need. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest with that other person. And if they don't like the work that you have to do, if what it truly takes for you to heal is something that they don't want to allow you to have, then that is something you have to consider. You have to recognize that maybe that's a deal breaker. You don't shortcut your forgiveness work or your healing work because the other person's uncomfortable. It's going to just be uncomfortable for everyone. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's something about, for me, my fault, obviously, because I'm enthusiastic about my own subject, but is the forgiveness work, because through doing it, you will know better whether or not you want to stay, or whether you want to go. And but it's still worth doing it. So you can stay in having forgiven, you can leave having forgiven. Either way, you win, because you're the one who's freeing yourself. But it is complex, because, like I said, you're going to have lots of meaning that you're going to need to work through with somebody. What are
Yeah.
you making it mean? You might want other information from the other person. You might need them to make amends. You might need that to happen as well, like your forgiveness, because your forgiveness, like I said about the sort of injustice gap, you're leaving. If you choose to forgive, there's still the injustice, and it may be that your partner might want to help that narrow by making relevant amends or an
Mhm.
apology, or there may be things that you need to have happen.
Yeah.
And obviously every case is different.
Yeah. And I think that that's kind of like you were saying earlier, very, when we get to that point, like if something's happened where there has been this massive break in the relationship and the trust, it's really difficult to do it on their own. Like, that's where they would need someone like you, or a therapist, someone who can navigate that, because there does have to be, kind of like, look, you're at this point, this is where you are. Your relationship is now in a place of transition, transformation. You are both going to have to get really uncomfortable. You are going to have to do things that you don't want to do and don't want to say, because to truly heal, if you're making the decision to heal, then you are going to identify your needs and meet your partner's needs. It's about, if I'm looking out for you, you're looking out for me, then we're both walking away from this feeling very validated, very heard. But if I'm being asked to do work, but I'm having to work more than you are, this is not balanced. This isn't going to work. And so for couples that I work with, it's always hard when I've got that one person who's like, hey, we have this thing in the relationship and I have to figure out how to heal from it. Great, let's dive in. But at some point, this has to also happen with your partner. You have to take all the things you've learned. Hopefully they're doing it too. And then we have to find this coming together. But where a lot of couples miss that is, well, I have to do it by myself and that's it. I have to get to a point where I'm okay. I have to get to a point where I forgive. It's like, yeah, but you're in a partnership. Very, very rarely can you completely fix one thing without your partner. It just doesn't work that way. So I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think you do need support, especially if there's those big things have happened. Like, you don't do your own surgery. You don't do your own dentist work. It's like, like there's certain things where it just doesn't make sense for us to try and do it by ourselves. And we are usually thinking, oh, I should be able to fix this, by myself.
Mhm.
Actually, it's really wonderful to have someone to help you and support you, just like you said, to face the things that you might not be able to see yourself,
Yeah.
because we have blind spots. And I totally agree with you that then there is individual work to be done, and then there's the rebuilding of the relationship or the new relationship. I mean, that's the other
Yeah.
really lovely thing. It's like you're not going to have the same relationship that you had originally. Maybe you're going to have a more honest relationship, one
Yeah.
that has more integrity, and where you're constructively and proactively building trust.
Yeah.
That is a possibility and a blessing, because maybe that showed you how inauthentic you were because you weren't saying what you needed,
Mhm.
or like you were sublimating yourself to the other person, or maybe that showed the other person aspects of themselves that they didn't know they had and that they can then bring to the relationship. We don't
Yeah.
know.
And even if we break it down, like, that's, we were talking about an extreme example in a marriage, but like even the day to day stuff, the like, hey, you're not pulling your weight and I'm really mad at you for it, or I'm resentful that I'm constantly doing more than you are, or I feel like I'm the primary parent and you're not really involved as much, or you don't support me emotionally the way I support you. Like, there is small forgiveness work that happens every day, right? Like, you could, even from a silly standpoint that's not marriage related, the number of people that will have something happen on the road, someone cuts them off, and then they're just pissed the rest of the day or the week. Like, we're constantly having to do this, like, am I picking up this batch of rubbish or am I releasing it? Like, okay, well, I picked it up. I didn't mean to. I got cut off on the street and I picked it up by accident because someone just entered my world. But now, like, oh, well, I don't want this. Let me put it down. Or, well, no, it's mine. I want to hang on to it forever. So I think, but we can have our frustrations on the road that lead to the resentment of people because people suck kind of thing. But then we bring it home. And now I'm a grump at home and I'm just frustrated with my spouse and snapping at my child and I don't want to do my stuff. So sometimes that forgiveness work has nothing to do with your family. It's completely external. It's the colleague at work or the boss or the whatever. But now I'm bringing that in and now I'm causing hurt to my family because maybe I'm not very nice to them. Maybe I'm a little bit more short with them, and maybe I'm not very kind hearted. So it's like there's forgiveness externally, but then I have to let go of that. Like, I have to forgive myself for kind of being an ass. Like, I just said something and did something to my spouse that was rude. I feel bad. Oh my gosh, I'm a terrible wife. I'm a terrible mom. And then it's like, okay, take a sec. Like, let's maybe every day we need to have like cleansing of garbage, of the rubbish we've picked up. Like, check in with yourself at the end of every day. Am I going to sleep holding this as a security blanket? Or am I shedding it and tossing it and clearing my space before I go to sleep every day?
Yeah. I mean, that's the ideal. If you can be that present to just
Yeah.
like, every night go, I, bless and release this day. It's
Yeah.
been perfect. It's done, let it go. But most of the time we don't have the presence of mind to do that. And we usually too
Right.
knackered or whatever. But also thinking about the things that happen in everyday life sometimes point us back to old material. So
Yeah.
to something in the past that's unresolved. And when I've worked with people in businesses or companies, although it looks like it's the boss, when you dig a little bit deeper, we used to have this saying on the retreat: if it's not one thing, it's your mother. We all make our forgiveness work, because
Yeah.
whatever our intentioned parents may have had towards us, they may have, like, they may have been not perfect, just like me as a parent was. You can ask my son, not perfect apparently, even though I really tried my best. But
Yep.
like, so we all have things that need to forgive. So sometimes the little things can point us back to something that's been unhealed,
Yeah.
or that needs our attention, which is great. So this present moment is the doorway back. And it's only really when someone like presses on something, you're thinking, oh God, actually that still hurts. Maybe there's still a splinter in there. I'll
But
do
yeah.
something about that.
Yeah, self-awareness, right? Um,
Right.
okay, girl, I gotta let you go. This has been so much fun, but we probably have gone quite over our time. I have loved talking to you. I want to know more real quick about the programs that you offer, where people can find you, and where they can find your book.
Yeah. So my book's on all major, like it's not in bookshops, it's on online bookshops,
Yes.
which I obviously can't mention.
Amazon, all the things. Excellent.
Yeah, and in lots of different countries as well. So if you're in the
Good.
States, on Amazon.com, it's also in the UK. My website is a UK one, so it's forgivenessmadeeasy.co.uk. So
Perfect. I'll link to it.
forgivenessmadeeasy.co.uk. Thank you.
Yep.
And what I offer is one-to-one coaching with people, and it usually works best in like 3 to 6 sessions, because we are like layers of an onion. So even though you might come with this husband, it may be we do mom, dad, previous husband, early relationship, like, so
Yep.
things unravel in a particular way.
Yeah.
So I get the best results with my clients over like 6 weeks
Yeah.
usually. And then I do forgiveness fields online, like, so I every now and then, and I usually theme them. So sometimes it's self-forgiveness, sometimes I do them like forgive your ex, or
Mhm.
or like the next one I'm doing is for the so maybe by the time this airs will be too late, but for Remembrance Sunday. So
Mhm.
heart to peace. So you come and do, just like you do your practice, and then you pledge your intention for peace, to global peace. Because one of the things I often say is that our forgiveness is an act of amnesty for humanity. It's like,
Mhm.
if I say I'm going to keep my heart a garden of peace, I'm making the world a more peaceful place. And that's powerful, given the lack of control that we have over
Yes,
what's going on globally.
definitely. And then if there was someone here in the US who was interested in working with you, they can do virtual coaching one-on-one with you. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
And tell us, just for fun. So you're a musician and a comedian. Tell us real quick about that.
I'm not really. I mean, I'm not really a proper stand-up comedian, but the musician part is just, it's so close to my heart. And I've been a singer-songwriter. I've got like 4 albums out. I've just recorded another one which is not released yet. And I've written a song for international peace, and even, that very wonderful Marianne Williamson quote: "Our deepest fear is not that we're inadequate. Our deepest fear is we're powerful beyond measure." There's a song version on YouTube called "Brilliant, Gorgeous, Talented, and Fabulous," which is my song version of
Love it.
that song. So I can send you a link to
Love
that.
that. So people can find your albums on YouTube, and we'll link to all of that
Right.
too.
Yeah, yeah,
Great.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so not a stand-up comedian.
No, not that's a sort of an aspiration. I kind of,
Oh,
I like making people laugh, and especially, I mean,
yes.
the thing is with forgiveness, I think it's really important to have a light attitude, even though it's a really deadly serious subject. To have a kind of like, we're all in
Oh,
this
yeah.
together. This is about our shadow, and to kind of like be a little bit lighthearted about it can be very
Yeah.
powerful.
I
Yeah.
like to I mean, I think that that's just the best way to get through life, is not take yourself too seriously and be able to just laugh at yourself and share, I don't know, I guess we're all a little bit weird, we're all a little bit crazy. Like, I love it. We should all just not take ourselves seriously.
Yeah, we need humor. We really do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Barbara, thank you so much. I am really excited to have connected with you. I think that I don't know. I see you in my life. So and I have a feeling we're going to be recording again, because I think that there's so much more specifically to get into that I don't think we even had the time. But you're so sweet. You're so pleasant to talk to. It's just so easy. So thank you again for being with me, and I'll link to all your stuff so people can find you on social media and all of that stuff as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Real pleasure talking to you too. Really.
All right, I'll talk to you
Sure.
soon.
Take good
Bye.
care. Bye.